Hello, this is Todd Wall from Aquatine Media, and I wanted to talk about an article I saw. The headline is China offers Africa 51 billion in fresh funding, promises a million jobs. A million jobs is a lot of jobs. So the article begins President Xi Jinping pledged on Thursday to step up China's support across debt-laden Africa with funding of nearly 51 billion over 3 years, backing for more infrastructure projects and the creation of at least 1 million jobs. China was ready to step up cooperation with Africa in industry, agriculture, infrastructure, trade, and investment, Xi told delegates from more than 50 African nations gathered in Beijing for the three-yearly Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. China and Africa account for one-third of the world population. Without our modernization, there will be no global modernization. That's interesting. One-third of the world's population. I guess that's true. China, the world's biggest bilateral lender, promised to carry out 3 times as many infrastructure projects across resource-rich Africa, despite Xi's avowed new preference for small and beautiful schemes based around selling advanced and green technologies in which Chinese firms have invested heavily. So this is true. It's going to be a little bit of a shift. I think China in the past has typically invested in relatively large infrastructure projects in Africa. And as their preferences and their priorities have shifted in China, and they're looking at expanding, green technology and just high tech industry, they're looking for markets for some of those products. So I think increasingly that's kind of what they're looking to do. The Chinese leader committed 360 billion won, $50 billion US dollars in financial assistance over 3 years, but specified that 210 billion would be dispersed through credit lines and at least 70 billion in fresh investment by Chinese companies. Smaller amounts would be provided through military aid and other projects. The article continues, at the 2021 China-Africa Summit in Dakar, China promised at least 10 billion in investment and the same again in credit lines. This time the financial assistance would be in yuan, an apparent push to further internationalize the Chinese yuan. So they're looking to basically move away from, the world typically trades and commerce typically takes place in US dollars, and they're looking to sort of make the yuan a rival to the US dollar. So apparently they're going to basically make these loans in Chinese yuan. China's loans, so here's a graph. It shows China's loans over time. You can see it starts out, if you go from left to right on that horizontal axis, basically it shows by year starting in 2000 and through current. You can see initially there was very little investment, very little loans taking place, and then it really rose sharply in the middle of the 2010s. You can see in 2016 it looked like it got to almost $30 billion. But over the past couple of years, you've seen it fallen off quite a bit. The loans to Africa, that amount has fallen quite a bit. This is largely due to a couple factors. I think I hit on one of them, but there's been an economic slowdown in China generally, which has kind of obviously impacted China's capacity to loan to Africa. As I mentioned, China's looking to basically develop markets for some of their more advanced technologies. And so some of the markets for which those technologies are probably more suitable are kind of, Europe and North America. I think a lot of the investments in China used to be or were, large infrastructure projects. And so it looks like the shift China wants to make towards more, high technology, green energy. Africa is not as an attractive market for those types of products. That's probably contributing to this decline in loans. And I think the other thing that, debt has just grown. There's a lot of debt. Africa owes China a great deal of money. China has made a lot of loans to Africa, and I think that China is probably becoming increasingly wary about being overextended and overloaning money to Africa. So the article continues, after the opening ceremony, delegates adopted the Beijing Declaration on building, in quotations, a shared future in the new era, as well as the Beijing Action Plan for 2025 through 2027, Chinese state media said. Xi also called for a China-Africa network of land and sea links and coordinated development, urging Chinese contractors to return to the continent now that COVID-19 curbs that disrupted its projects have been lifted. So that's good. Basically, some of these projects can resume now that COVID-19 is no longer a concern. He did not mention in his speech, despite Beijing being many Africa states' biggest bilateral lender, but the action plan included terms for repayment postponements and called for the establishment of an African rating agency. So, they're already trying to basically work out terms for some of these African countries that have borrowed money and sort of defer repayment of those loans. This has contributed, obviously, to their reluctance. And kind of that previous graph where you saw loan payments had peaked in the mid-2010s and have kind of fallen off pretty sharply. That explains part of that. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the summit that African countries' inadequate access to debt relief and scarce resources was a recipe for social unrest. Africa lending arrangements vary from country to country. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia come after China for countries such as Ethiopia. Others like Kenya would have many creditors, including European nations. There are also debts to multilateral bodies such as the World Bank and private bondholders. So the article continues, talks about the shared future. The forum chalks out a 3-year program for China and every African state bar, which retains ties to Taiwan. In addition to 30 infrastructure connectivity products, Xi said China was ready to launch 30 clean energy projects in Africa, offering to cooperate on nuclear technology and tackle a power deficit that has delayed efforts to industrialize. The article goes on a little bit. For the most part, that's kind of what's most relevant in the article. But I'd be interested in getting your thoughts or comments. If you have any thoughts about the situation, I'd love to hear them in the comment section. Also, please don't forget to like this video and also subscribe to my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks.